This is part 2 of a 2-part series. If you missed part 1 last week, tune in for part 1 of our talk with Magalie René. And coming up next, we have for you part 2 of our talk with Magalie René. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, let's get right into the episode.
Man. So I want to pivot a little bit and get into specifically any of your background with when you're working with teams and you're sort of brought in, and we talked a little bit earlier about buzzwords like conflict resolution being one, but maybe team dynamics and some of your thoughts on that field.
I'd say team dynamics. When I hear that, I hear team building, and I hear a few. I'm going to just give you 3 of the top key things that when I think about team building and team dynamics that I think are fundamental. Trust. That means trusting yourself and being able to some degree, trust others, which is a biggie for most of us. Connection and relationship. And the last one is mindful vulnerability. You cannot relate to people if you are unwilling, truly relate and truly connect with other people if you're unwilling to be vulnerable. But when we talk about vulnerability in the workplace, we're not talking about an overflow of excessive emotion unless there's something that warrants that.
That's right.
People pass away. COVID was a nightmare. And there were so many other things, right? Trauma that's happening in the news to different groups of people. Like, it's a lot going on. So of course, common sense isn't so common, but let's take that into consideration. But outside of those bigger issues, let's not use vulnerability in a toxic way, right? To force people's hands, to pressure them or manipulate them into acting a certain way, into getting so that you can get away with certain things in the workplace. We've all been there. We all know what we're talking about. But what we want to do instead is employ mindful vulnerability. That means being open to sharing a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about the ways that you're feeling or things you're experiencing, even in your personal life with colleagues or people in the workplace. Just doesn't have to be a ton, but just open up a little bit.
Yeah.
That's the foundation and the crux of relationship. Yeah. And that's how people begin to see you as a human being and not just as a role you play in the workplace. And trust, this is the one thing I'll say about that. So trust is about knowing that we've made it this far. That means we've already fixed mistakes. We've lived through mistakes. We've messed up at work and we've cleaned it up. We've learned how to own our issues to some degree. We've pivoted. We've overcome. You've done so much. We've gotten up the ladder in a lot of cases. If you're an executive leader, you've moved yourself through your career. Look how far you've come, right? And if we know that, then already there is foundation for trusting yourself because you know that whatever's coming, you'll be able to adapt. And that goes from the big picture to the little picture in terms of engaging and connecting with people. You know that even if you need to have a difficult, challenging conversation with someone, you're going to be able to move through it. It's not going to be perfect because nothing is, but you can always pivot and come back and say, hey, this is going in a direction I didn't want it to go. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's where I want to bring us back to. Yeah. So you have a lot of tools and you've gotten so far already. So really focusing on that trust, that connection point, which comes from mindful vulnerability, is how you really build effective, strong, connected teams. The people that are going to go a little bit of the extra mile for you because they care, because they know that you do.
This feels like part art, part science, right? Where you kind of need to play with that vulnerability a little bit. And it reminds me of the sort of philosophical principle of like the mask, right? And so I'm wearing this mask to sort of hide myself, my true self, number one, and number two, to curate what I show you.
100%.
And which mask I put on or how much I really take off and expose and show is that kind of mindful vulnerability, I think, is what I'm sort of,
I think you get it. You really get it. Yeah, you really get it. I talk about that all the time. It's like, we're not going to get into all of it, but there's the 4 needs of the ego and like how we protect ourselves. We want to be right. Yeah. We want to look good, or we want to avoid pain, right? There are all these different ones. And we could dig into my Instagram and all the things and talk about what they all are.
What's a decent on-ramp, actually? Because I imagine, as I am fascinated and super engaged in this conversation, and I sincerely hope the listener is as well, to get a hold of you, to ping you, to reach out? What are some good sort of on-ramps for someone to maybe contact you?
It depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for confidence, then you want to jump into YouTube, and it's Magalie René on YouTube. Also Magalie_René on Instagram. That's a lot of confidence content in your own being. How do you really expand and go on this confidence journey? And then if you're interested in compassionate leadership, then you want to go to Workplace Catalyst, also on Instagram. Or if you want to bring us in, we have a team of facilitators and also a team of stellar. I'm like so impressed, I want to cry. But like stellar executive coaches they're so much better at what they do than I am at what I do. I am not kidding you. Phenomenal. But if you're interested in that, then you can of course come to calendly.com/workplace catalyst and jump into our calendar and see about us coming in to support your teams.
Love that. And so what I'd maybe like to end with is kind of parting thoughts. So give you an opportunity to review some of the things we've said, review some of the things you really kind of have in your head and heart, and maybe, package anything else for the audience that you may really just kind of want to touch upon.
Yeah, so, oh my goodness, I have so much to say. It's always so hard to be concise. I'm going to just go over for now what are some of the key points that we talked about. So one of them was feedback and recognizing that feedback is neutral and it's just information. And what if we engaged with it, receiving it, and also giving it in a way that had us know that it's just information? How much less triggered would we be, and how much more authentic would we be? And if we remembered that feedback is about forwarding someone, then we're not lobbing feedback at people to be right, to protect ourselves, to look good. Instead, we're sharing it because we care that they advance themselves, and we want to give them an opportunity. If they don't take the opportunity, listen.
I led that horse to water.
Listen, I was about to say that. You took the words out of my mouth. I'm squealing. But yeah, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And so there's that. So the feedback was one piece. We talked about mindful vulnerability and really understanding that vulnerability is a very, very powerful tool for communication, for connection, for relationship, and for team building. But we want to use it in an effective, common sense way when we're in the workplace, and not as a way to manipulate others or even put ourselves in a certain position. We want to use that mindfully, in a conscious way. Another thing we talked about was, I don't know, what else did we talk about?
Well, we talked about connection, and it's, what's weird for me is I almost was worried I wouldn't be able to work in that I ran the marathon, but I totally ran the marathon, and I'm not letting this episode go without explaining. As I sit here, my legs are on fire, and maybe that's an example of the type of sharing that brings people closer
That
together.
was the wildest segue. I'm looking at the audience because we're all side-eyeing you on that segue.
Hold on to your scooters, boys and girls. I got a segue.
You really wanted to get that in. What I'll say is, yes, of course, sharing about something intimate happening in your life is absolutely a way to connect and be vulnerable.
That's right.
My legs are killing me because it's also a humble brag.
Yeah.
I'm all for humble brag.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's a mastery of leadership right there, when you can segue into humble brag in any way. Yeah. But so mindful vulnerability and team building. I just love the idea of really starting to be able to see other people for who they really are and not for the stories that we've made up about them.
Yes.
And that really requires that we put down our own, the sunglasses we all walk through life with. And that does take work, but what I'll say about it is it's practice. And so a lot of these tools, we have a lot of frameworks that we share with Fortune 500 leaders, with executives all over the world at like incredible companies, some small, some are conglomerates. And these frameworks, I always say, don't try to boil the ocean, right? Take it one step at a time. So whatever you heard on this podcast, if there's something, one thing, a kernel that landed for you, just work with that one thing.
Yeah.
And incorporate and apply that and see what a big shift that can make over time. And it's like a muscle. Confidence, that's what I'll leave them with, is that confidence and compassion both are like muscles, but especially confidence. When we are compassionate with ourselves, when we can get off of our stuff and see other people for who they are, we're being compassionate with them, and we're building our muscles of confidence. When we lean out a little bit and we trust ourselves, and we know that even if we don't know the outcome of this conversation or the outcome of this project, we're going to be able to navigate and adjust as needed to get the thing done and get to our end goal. When we can do that, then we're building the muscle of confidence. When we can give people honest feedback, it's uncomfortable. And I know I used to get knots in my stomach delivering it and also receiving it. Oh my God, they have feedback for me. What's it going to be? Yeah. When we can start practicing, releasing all of that energy and just coming from neutral, then we're building our confidence.
And maybe giving yourself the safety of knowing, like building a muscle, it might be uncomfortable at first.
100%.
It might be achy. It might take a while, right? These things maybe take advancement in stages, but you're still moving forward. You're still building it, and it's worth the work.
100%. I think it's worth the work because we're taught. So I have a book, an upcoming book. It's not immediate, so I don't want to get anybody too excited. The title isn't even out. All of it is very top secret. But it's
when
really,
your book drops, I will repost this episode with it, so you can sit on it for now. But then we'll tease it out then. It's really exciting for you.
I'm very excited about it. And very
like
passionate.
Running a marathon.
I know. I'm so done. Actually, it is.
No. It's way more. It's way bigger.
It's a different kind of marathon.
Way fewer
it's
people
its own
write
kind of marathon, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I know you're hilarious. But in any case, good grief. I'm rolling my eyes for those who are listening.
No, I think they heard. You rolled them audibly.
Okay, great. But so I don't even know. Oh, I was saying that in this book that I'm writing, we're taught that confidence is something we put on.
Yeah.
It's a pose, it's a mask, it's this feeling, and we've got to just like do this thing, and we do and do and do, and if we do enough, we're going to feel confident. But what happens if you fall ill, if something shifts in your life, and if you can't identify with who you've been up till now? Confidence is something that's internal, and it's got to be cultivated. And I like to think about unshakable confidence. And certainly that can be built over time. But if you do practice those things, get out of your comfort zone, and just really lean into the core of who you truly are, and you do that little by little, day by day, you're going to have eventually, and that's why it's worth it, you're going to come to unshakable confidence that comes from your core. Yeah,
I almost hear you contrasting the kind of fake it till you make it with real deep foundational confidence.
100%. And in that, I always talk about some of the people when they are, so I'm just thinking like when the market crashed, right? And there are people that commit suicide.
That's right.
Because their confidence and everything about their identity came from these external sources.
And crashed down.
And when all the external goes away, then your sense of self goes. And I'm not about that life, right?
Yes.
I'm about like stepping into a room and shifting that room and that dynamic and owning myself no matter what is going on, when I've got it and when I don't. Because we always have that core confidence. It's inside of us.
I wish we could talk for hours.
I know, we probably
just
could.
We could easily.
We could.
But that's a great place to leave. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really, really appreciate you being out. That's all the time we have this week on the H.I.T podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.
Whether it's cause or peace, something unique,